like this.
According to the National Crime Victimization Survey, crime reports, and research studies, currently an estimated 85 to 90% of domestic violence victims are female. Those who are most vulnerable are women between the ages of 16 and 24. The cost of intimate partner rape, physical assault, and stalking exceeds $5.8 billion each year. Females account for 39% of hospital emergency department visits for violence-related injuries and 84% of persons treated for intentional injuries caused by intimate partners. Licensed clinical professional therapist Dr. Sonia Ford defines what a victim is.
The simplest term of a victim is someone who has lost their power. I believe that's the simplest term. Someone who has lost their power and feels like they have no control over their situation.
The cycle of violence includes abuse, guilt, excuses, normal behavior, fantasy and planning, and finally, setup. Survivor Marsha Woodland says she learned this cycle at a young age as she saw her mother being abused, but still grew up to be a victim herself.
Not only did I experience it, but I witnessed it for most of my childhood. So much so that I actually had a nervous breakdown at 5 years old, and I was removed from school. Talk about loss of control. I went to bed with hair, and I would wake up with my hair on my pillow. So there was a lot of powerlessness and loss of control early on, and so I developed into a person of learned helplessness as an adult, and the cycle continued basically. For me, was it ever just physical? Because they had to abuse me emotionally in order for me to put up with them physically abusing me. Yeah.
The best known form of domestic violence is physical abuse, which includes aggression or assault. But mental abuse among spouses is also put into this category. It can start off as something small as an argument, but what draws the line between an argument and abusive behavior is if the person intimidates you or makes threats. Dr. Ford elaborates.
Well, I think the difference is the feeling that you get and the emotion and how intense it is and how frequent it is. I think frequency really determines it, because you can have an argument with someone, be mad at them, and the next day you're fine. But if it's something that is frequent and you begin to feel belittled, your self-esteem starts to shrink, when that inner self begins to change because of the argument, I believe that is when it kind of crosses the line.
The objective of an abuser is to have control over their partner psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and physically. Woodland discusses how the verbal abuse is what affected her the most and made it harder to leave her partner.
Never, that person's wrong, I need to move on. You're stupid, that's what you get, you don't have a job, you don't have an education, you ain't not gonna be nothing, just like your mom said. That's what would go through my mind. And so rather than defend myself, I would, like they call it manning up, I would just man up and take it and wish for it to hurry up and be over.
According to the Domestic Violence Research Center, studies suggest that between 3.3 to 10 million children witness some form of domestic violence annually. Violence is a learned behavior, and little boys who grew up in homes where domestic violence is occurring are 100 times more likely to become abusers than boys in violence-free homes.
Each situation of abuse really differs. It could be because they may have been abused themselves as a child. It could be because they had a male role model who they saw being abusive and they think that that's the way to be a man. It could be because of things that they've witnessed. It could be because they can't control their anger, and the only way they've ever been able to release it is to act out. And if it's with someone they love and it happens to be that woman, then that's who they act out on. And sometimes it may just be a one-time thing where they just hit you and they think, oh, I'll never do that again, I'm so sorry, but it felt so comfortable, and it becomes the norm. Look at the person for who they are, see how they're treating you in the beginning. As you begin to notice changes, oftentimes we'll say, oh, they didn't mean that, oh, that was just one time, he didn't really mean it, or she didn't really mean it. So I think that when, again, it becomes that frequent, when you begin to have a pattern, that's the red flag. So don't ignore those red flags, because that's what we often do, especially as women. We want the relationship to work. We want to make excuses. When you find yourself making excuses for someone constantly, and it's above the norm of just a general argument, that is a big red flag there, those excuses.
Domestic violence victims may have low self-esteem, show major signs of personality changes, be depressed, anxious, or suicidal. Woodland says that she finally got the strength to leave her abusive relationship, but turned to something worse that would take a similar and negative control over her life.
Well, after a certain amount of time, although I still didn't care enough about myself to get help, I just couldn't imagine another gun being put to my head. I just could not imagine. Yeah, I just couldn't imagine. And so at that point, I realized that just maybe I didn't need to be loved. Just maybe I needed to be miserable by myself. And at that point, I turned to drugs. So that became my companion. And that whipped me worse than any human being ever could have.
Oftentimes, I believe that they do try to work the issues out on their own, and that's most of the time because of guilt. They blame themselves. They don't want to share with family members or friends because oftentimes they may have a certain image that they want to uphold. They don't want someone to look at them differently, so they try to work it out themselves. And sometimes it'll take years before they'll finally say, I need help. You know, it'll take years. But it's best to try and seek help so you don't have to do it on your own. But oftentimes, people really do try to handle it on their own.
The first step in getting out of an abusive relationship is to create a plan and seek help. Bridget Harwood explains how her staff is trained to help victims.
So you can have two exact types of crimes, exact type of domestic violence, right? Maybe really serious physical violence, financial control, crimes related to that. And these two people that you're trying to serve going through the same crime may have an exactly different response to that. One may be very, very much not fazed at all, and the other may be in an acute trauma situation. And we need to be trained to understand, I'm not going to go in with a preconceived notion about what your needs are based off of what you're going through.
Well, I wouldn't say that the help wasn't useful. It just didn't work for me. Everybody was told, fill out these papers, we're going to go to the courts, then we're going to go this place, then we're going to do that. It wasn't individual help for me. And so that's why it didn't work. It's not to say that it wouldn't work for someone else. It just didn't work. I needed to be valued and respected. That was number one. In being valued and respected, then what I thought and what I felt would have mattered, even if it didn't coincide with your treatment plan. The other thing, if the services and the care would have remained consistent even when I was afraid or hesitant to go through with something on the treatment plan. And lastly, if I had peer support, someone there who I know had gone through what I went through and came out on the other side, and she actually didn't die.
Other than seeking professional help, victims should turn to people they trust to get out of an abusive relationship. Kevin Mills explains what responsible men can do to help.
Men are there as brothers, as pastors, as business leaders, as friends, as ex-boyfriends who are connected to folks who have been traumatized, who are part of a violent relationship, and their ability to reach out for them on some level to get them some support and some help. It might be the first opportunity for them to reach services, and it may be the first opportunity for them to save their lives. So we have men in our community who will turn a blind eye and say, oh, well, she deserved it. We can have, some of our friends are abusing their girlfriends, and we know it. And it's important that we don't tolerate that kind of behavior, that we say, an argument is one thing, putting your hands and being violent towards someone is something else. And our men need to recognize that and be able to stand against their friends when these kind of things are happening and give support to the folks who are being victimized.
Marsha Woodland has stopped her pattern of being in abusive relationships and claims the rightful title of being a survivor. She believes that all women have the right to be treated like queens and leaves victims with one piece of advice.
I would tell them to continue to seek help, regardless of how many times it takes, because there is help out here that does not diminish hope. So just never give up.
Well, I think a survivor is someone who has gained their power back. We talked about a victim as someone who has lost their power. A survivor is someone who has overcome horrible things and they have gained their power back and they have moved on in spite of their past. So it's not reliving your past and holding on to that past. It's really about gaining your power and moving forward. And that's a survivor, moving forward.
Thank you.